Welcome to Veiled Narratives, where love meets destiny, and every whisper hides a secret waiting to be unveiled. The grand mansion of Ethan Blackwood stood like a sleeping beast under the silver moonlight. Marble columns gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, and the scent of roses drifted through the corridors. To the world, Ethan was a symbol of success, an untouchable billionaire whose empire stretched across continents. Yet, inside those towering walls, silence was his closest companion. That evening, he returned from another meaningless event, an evening filled with empty smiles, crystal glasses, and hollow conversations. The moment he stepped inside his mansion, the weight of loneliness wrapped around him like a velvet cloak. He loosened his tie and sank into the deep leather couch of his study. The faint sound of footsteps reached him, a rhythm so delicate it barely disturbed the air. It was Isabella Reyes, the new maid. She moved like a secret, quiet, graceful, and careful not to leave traces. Her dark hair was tied neatly, her hands gentle yet steady as she dusted the shelves and arranged his books. There was something about her that Ethan couldn't name, an aura of calm sadness, the kind that drew you closer without a single word. He had noticed her for days now. How she always lowered her gaze when he passed, how she never spoke unless necessary, and how sometimes she would pause near the window looking at the stars as if she belonged to them. That night something changed. Ethan felt the urge to understand her silence. When she entered the study, he decided to test a thought that had lingered in his mind, something impulsive, something out of character. He lay back on the couch and pretended to be asleep. He heard her soft gasp when she saw him there. The rustle of her steps slowed, her breathing turned shallow. For a moment she hesitated, then continued cleaning quietly. The brush of her cloth against the table, the faint tap of her heels, it all became a slow symphony around him. Then came the pause. He could sense her standing close. The warmth of her presence brushed against his skin. And then, in a trembling whisper, she spoke, words she never meant for him to hear. "You look so peaceful when you're asleep, not like the man the world fears. I wish you knew how kind you really are when no one's watching." Ethan's heart stilled. The sound of her voice was soft, melodic, almost reverent. She wasn't speaking to a billionaire. She was speaking to the man beneath the armor. The one even he had forgotten existed. "They think you're cold," she whispered again. "But you're not. You help people quietly. You never boast. I've seen it in the small things. Like the way you look at your staff, or the flowers you replace every week in the hallway, for your late mother." A lump formed in his throat. No one had ever noticed. No one had ever cared. She sighed softly. "I don't know why I'm saying this. Maybe because I know you'll never hear me. But you deserve to be loved, Mr. Blackwood. Not for your name, but for your heart." Her words were a whisper. But to Ethan, they roared louder than any applause he'd ever received. He felt his pulse race, his fingers twitch, but he stayed still, afraid to break the moment. She took one last glance at him, then gently adjusted the blanket over his shoulders. Her touch lingered, a fleeting warmth that sank straight into his chest. Then she turned off the lamp, her footsteps fading into the hallway. When the door finally closed, Ethan exhaled, his breath shaky. He opened his eyes, staring into the dim light filtering through the window. For years people had praised him for his power, envied his wealth, feared his name. But tonight, a quiet maid's whisper had done what millions couldn't. It had reached him. He sat up slowly, the echo of her words dancing through the silence. "You deserve to be loved." It wasn't just a whisper. It was a spark, one that melted the frost that had long encased his heart. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He kept replaying every word she said. He realized that for the first time in years, he wanted to wake up not to a deal or a meeting, but to a voice that spoke from truth. Outside, the moon hung like a witness, pale and eternal. And in that lonely mansion, a billionaire's heart, once frozen by indifference, began to thaw with the warmth of a whisper that was never meant to be heard. The morning sun spilled through the glass walls of the Blackwood mansion, turning marble floors into rivers of gold. Ethan Blackwood sat at the edge of his bed, still haunted by the voice that had wrapped around his soul the night before. Her whisper, it wasn't just a few words. It was a melody that had woven itself into his mind. All night, he had replayed it again and again. The soft tremor in her tone, the gentle honesty that could only come from someone who didn't seek anything in return. He'd built empires, negotiated billions, commanded rooms full of men, but never had anyone spoken about his heart. When he stepped out of his room that morning, his usual world of silence felt different. The ticking clock seemed softer, the air lighter. Every sound reminded him of her presence, and when he saw Isabella in the corridor, her hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes focused on polishing the silver vase, something inside him stilled. For the first time in years, Ethan noticed details: the curve of her wrist as she wiped the glass, the quiet concentration on her face, the way sunlight caressed her skin, giving her a glow that no designer dress could buy. She was simple, but there was grace in her simplicity, a kind of beauty that didn't demand attention, it earned it. He didn't speak, he couldn't, but his eyes followed her, discreetly, silently. Throughout the week, he found himself waiting for the evenings, for that soft sound of her steps in the corridor, for the quiet hum of her voice when she thought she was alone. He would sit in his study pretending to read while secretly watching her reflection in the window. She moved like poetry, delicate, purposeful, serene. He learned her rhythm. She would hum softly when dusting, pause near the piano as if listening to an invisible song, and sometimes, late at night, she'd walk to the giant glass wall overlooking the city lights. She'd stand there, her fingers pressed lightly against the glass, eyes shimmering as if she were staring at something far away, perhaps someone she'd lost. And each night, Ethan found himself pretending again. He would rest on the couch, close his eyes and wait, not for sleep but for her whisper. Sometimes, she would talk to herself in a barely audible voice, about her mother, about how life had taken everything from her yet still left her breath, about dreams that had died quietly, and hopes that refused to. But then she'd always end with a line that shook him to his core. "You're not as cold as they say, Mr. Blackwood, you just look lonely." Lonely. The word echoed in his chest like a confession. She had seen through everything: the tailored suits, the stoic facade, the $1 billion smile. That night, after she left, Ethan found himself wandering the halls. He stopped by the massive mirror near the staircase, staring at his reflection. For the first time, he didn't see the businessman, the empire builder. He saw a man who had been surviving on noise and numbers, a man who'd forgotten what it meant to be seen. The next day, he started testing his own heart. He would enter the kitchen quietly just to catch a glimpse of her laughing softly with the cook. He would deliberately leave his study door ajar to hear her faint humming as she passed. Every moment became a small act of discovery, every glance a secret exchange of something wordless yet powerful. But the truth was, Ethan wasn't just observing her. He was being transformed by her presence. He began to smile again, just slightly, when she wasn't looking. He started sitting in the garden where she arranged flowers, pretending to read while his heart listened to her voice. And when she accidentally brushed past him one afternoon, apologizing quickly, the soft warmth of her touch lingered long after she had gone. The world outside still called him ruthless, but within those walls, he was no longer the billionaire the world knew. He was just a man, quietly falling in love with the sound of a woman's whispers. One night, as a storm rumbled across the city, Ethan sat once again in his study. The rain drummed gently against the glass and Isabella entered, carrying a tray of tea. She thought he was asleep, as always. She placed the tray down and stood beside him for a moment. Then, in that tender voice, she spoke again, unaware that her every word was now engraved in his soul. "You must have loved someone once, but they must have hurt you badly. I can feel it in your silence. Maybe that's why you built walls instead of a home." Her voice broke slightly. "But you deserve more than walls. You deserve someone who'd stay, even if all your gold disappeared." Ethan's pulse raced. He wanted to open his eyes, to tell her he was awake, that her words were melting away every wall he'd built. But he couldn't. He wasn't ready. Not yet. When she turned to leave, her reflection lingered in the glass beside him. Fragile, luminous, unforgettable. As the door closed, he whispered softly to the empty room, "And maybe that someone is you." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood by the same glass wall she often looked through, staring at the endless city lights. For the first time in years, they didn't seem lonely. They looked like possibilities. And though she didn't know it yet, Isabella had changed everything. Her whispers had become his heartbeat, her silence his peace, her honesty his undoing. He had once pretended to sleep to escape reality. Now, he pretended only to hear her speak, because her voice had become the most beautiful truth he had ever known. Rain painted silver streaks against the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion that evening, casting trembling reflections across the marble floor. The world outside was drowned in thunder, but inside Ethan's heart was louder, filled with a longing he could no longer ignore. For nights he had listened to her whispers like a starving man tasting life again. For days he had watched her from a distance, memorizing her quiet grace. But now, something in the air told him change was near. He was in his library that night, books towering like silent witnesses, when he heard the faintest sound, a sob, soft and broken, drifting through the hallway. His heart tightened instantly. It was her. He followed the sound quietly, his polished shoes echoing faintly on the marble, until he reached the dim corridor near the servants' quarters. There, near the wall of portraits, stood Isabella, her back pressed against the pillar, tears glistening down her cheeks under the golden hallway light. Her small hands clutched a piece of paper, crumpled and wet from her tears. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He simply watched, the way her shoulders shook, the way her pain seemed too pure to belong in such a cold mansion. He wanted to speak, to comfort her, but he didn't know how. So many people feared him that he'd forgotten how to be gentle. Finally, he took a step closer. His voice came out softer than he expected, almost tender. "Isabella, are you all right?" she gasped, quickly wiping her face, trying to hide her tears. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were still awake." He took another step forward, his tone calm yet filled with quiet command. "Don't apologize for being human." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick, emotional, trembling with words neither dared to speak. He glanced at the crumpled paper in her hand. "What's that?" She hesitated, then finally whispered, It's a hospital bill. My mother's. She's not doing well. I send almost everything I earn to her treatment, but they say it's not enough." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be telling you this. It's not your concern." But it was. Every word stabbed at him. Because in that moment, Ethan realized the woman who'd given him back his heart was silently drowning in her own pain. He stepped closer until he was just a few feet away. "How long have you been carrying this burden alone?" Her eyes shimmered as she looked up at him. "Long enough to stop expecting help," she said quietly. "People don't care unless they gain something from it." Her honesty struck him like lightning. Because once upon a time, he'd said the same thing. To himself, in the mirror, in every lonely night where his success tasted like ashes. Ethan's voice softened further. "You're wrong, Isabella. Some people care even when there's nothing to gain." Her breath caught, her lashes fluttered, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked. His dark, intense gaze meeting hers, wide and vulnerable. Time slowed. The storm outside seemed to hush, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. But before he could say more, she turned away, clutching the paper tightly. "You don't have to pity me, sir. I'm just your maid. My problems shouldn't stain your perfect world." Her words pierced deeper than she knew. Perfect world. If only she knew how hollow it truly was. He took a slow step toward her. "Don't ever say that again," he whispered. "You don't stain my world, Isabella. You bring light into it." She froze. The words hung in the air between them, trembling with unspoken meaning. And then, something within her broke. She covered her mouth, but her tears flowed freely now. "Why do you say things like that?" she whispered. "Why do you make me feel seen when I've tried so hard to disappear?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and gently offered it to her. His fingers brushed hers, a fleeting, electric contact that made her heart stumble. She looked up at him again, her face streaked with tears, eyes searching his as if to find the truth behind his kindness, and in his gaze she found it. No pity, no pretense, just raw sincerity. He spoke softly, his voice a mixture of steel and vulnerability. "You said people don't care unless they want something. But you cared about me, didn't you, Isabella? Even when you thought I wasn't listening." Her breath caught. The realization hit her instantly. He had heard her whispers. Every word, every confession. A storm of emotions crossed her face. Shock, embarrassment, disbelief. You heard me." He nodded, his expression unreadable yet tender. "Every night, every word, every whisper that breathed life into this cold house." She stepped back, tears pooling again. "I shouldn't have." "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't regret it. Because those whispers reminded me I'm still alive." Silence fell again. This time not heavy, but sacred. The sound of rain against the windows filled the space between them like music. Ethan took one step closer, his voice a low murmur. You said you wished I wasn't your boss, but someone you could love. Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. He smiled faintly, sadly, beautifully. What if I told you I wished the same? Her heart stopped. In that instant, the mansion no longer felt like a palace. It felt like a secret world, suspended between wealth and longing. The billionaire and the maid, two souls from different worlds, both stripped of pretense, both trembling on the edge of something forbidden yet pure. A thunderclap rolled outside, echoing like destiny itself, and as she looked into his eyes she knew. His words weren't a game. They were a confession wrapped in luxury and loneliness. That night, something unspoken bloomed between them, delicate yet powerful. A love neither could name yet both could feel in the silence that followed. It was the beginning of everything they had both been missing. Morning came softly to the Blackwood estate. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed in gold and silver hues. The scent of wet roses drifted through the garden, mingling with the gentle murmur of fountains. But within the mansion something deeper had shifted, not in the walls or the air, but in Ethan's heart. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes he saw her face, tear-streaked, fragile, beautiful. Every time he tried to think of anything else, her voice came back to him, whispering words that had already become part of his soul. I wish you weren't my boss, but someone I could love. He'd built his life on control, every emotion neatly hidden behind tailored suits and glass offices. But now, his heart was no longer his own. It belonged to the quiet maid who had unknowingly rewritten the script of his existence. That morning, Ethan found himself standing near the grand window overlooking the garden. The air shimmered with the scent of jasmine. He had called Isabella to bring his morning coffee, not because he needed it, but because he needed her. When she entered, her movements were softer than usual, her gaze lowered, her voice barely above a whisper. You called for me, sir. Her tone was polite, but her hands trembled slightly. The memory of last night still hung between them like unspoken fire. Ethan turned to face her. He wasn't wearing his usual suit, just a white shirt with the top buttons undone, sleeves rolled up, revealing the warmth of his skin and the quiet exhaustion of a man who had thought too much. The morning sun made his dark hair gleam, outlining him in a golden halo. I did, he said quietly. Isabella, come here. She hesitated. Is something wrong? He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that disarms. Everything's wrong, he murmured, yet for the first time. It feels right. Her brows knit in confusion, but her feet carried her closer, drawn to the gravity of his voice. When she was just a few steps away, Ethan spoke again. Slower this time, every word measured and deliberate. Why did you stop whispering? Her heart lurched. The question struck like lightning, simple, yet filled with impossible weight. She looked up at him, her breath catching. You heard me again. He nodded. Every night since the first. Her lips parted, shock flickering across her face. I thought you were asleep. I was pretending. He admitted, his voice deep, laced with sincerity. Because your words, they were the only thing that made me feel alive. Isabella's eyes glistened. You shouldn't have listened, she whispered. He took a step closer, his gaze piercing but tender. And yet, I'm glad I did. Because in a house full of silence, your voice was the only truth. She blinked away tears, clutching her apron as if it could anchor her trembling. You can't mean that, sir. I'm just... Ethan didn't let her finish. You're not just anything, he said firmly. You are the only person who's seen me, not the billionaire, not the empire, not the name. Me, her breath trembled. But you're my employer. I shouldn't have said those things. He took another step closer, until he stood directly in front of her. The distance between them was now nothing but the sound of their breaths mingling in the air. His scent, warm, faintly woody, enveloped her. Say it again, he whispered. She looked up, confused. Say what? That you wished I weren't your boss, he said softly, his voice barely above a murmur. Say it again. This time, I'll answer. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest. She tried to look away, but his eyes held her still. Slowly, her voice broke through the silence. I wished you weren't my boss. He exhaled deeply, his eyes darkening with restrained emotion. And I wished, he said, you weren't my maid. Her breath caught. The world seemed to freeze. He reached up slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, reverent, almost trembling, like a man afraid of breaking something sacred. You've no idea what your words did to me, Isabella. You saw me when no one else ever dared to look." Her eyes filled again, tears shimmering like tiny diamonds. "You can't say things like that, Ethan," she whispered, finally calling him by name. A name that left her lips like a secret. "It's not right." He smiled sadly. "Maybe not," he said. "But it's real." The moment hung between them, electric, silent, infinite. Outside, the morning breeze moved the roses, petals drifting into the air like small bursts of color. Inside, two hearts collided in quiet confession. "I used to think love was a weakness," he said, voice raw, "that it distracted men from power. But you—" He paused, his voice breaking. "You made me realize love isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes all this worth having." Isabella closed her eyes, tears spilling freely now. "Why are you saying this?" "Because," he said softly, "if I don't, I'll lose the only truth I've found in years." Her hands trembled, caught between wanting to touch him and fearing the consequences. He noticed, smiled faintly, and whispered, "It's all right." And then, slowly, carefully, Ethan reached out and took her hand. The moment his fingers touched hers, it was as though the world around them disappeared. No marble, no chandeliers, no wealth, only warmth, breath, and heartbeat. "I don't know where this will go," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles, "but I know what I feel isn't something I can ignore." Her lips quivered. "And what do you feel?" He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Alive." The word lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and before she could turn away, Ethan gently wiped it with his thumb. "Don't hide your tears," he said. "They're the most honest thing in this room." For a long moment, they stood like that, two souls bound by something neither wealth nor logic could explain. Then, softly, she pulled her hand away and whispered, "You should rest, Ethan." He smiled faintly. "I have," he said. "For the first time, I actually am awake." As she walked away, his gaze followed her. The woman who had turned his silence into music, his loneliness into longing, his mansion into home. And though she didn't see it, Ethan whispered into the golden morning light, "You woke me up, Isabella. And I don't ever want to fall asleep again." The night had returned to the Blackwood mansion, but this time it didn't bring silence. It brought anticipation. The air shimmered with something invisible, something soft and magnetic. Outside, the moonlight kissed the marble courtyard, and the wind carried the faint scent of jasmine through the open windows. The house that once echoed with emptiness now pulsed with unspoken words. Ethan stood by the fireplace in his study, his shirt sleeves rolled, the faint orange glow casting gold along his jawline. His heart was restless, a rhythm that refused to settle since that morning's confession. He hadn't seen Isabella since. She had avoided him all day. No morning greetings, no lingering presence in the hallways, not even the soft hum of her voice drifting through the corridors. It was as if she'd vanished, and with her absence, the mansion had fallen silent again. But this silence felt unbearable. He turned toward the grand piano, her favorite spot when she thought no one was watching. A single white rose lay there, fresh, delicate, and new. She'd replaced the one from yesterday, just as she always did. His fingers brushed the petals, and he felt the ache of missing her. And then, like a faint echo, came the familiar sound of footsteps. He didn't move. He didn't have to. He knew. She entered the room slowly, wearing a simple pale dress that swayed around her ankles like moonlight in motion. Her hair was untied for the first time, soft waves spilling across her shoulders. The candlelight caught her face, and Ethan's heart stuttered. She looked both fragile and fierce, like someone ready to walk away from something she didn't want to leave. "Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, eyes cast downward, "I came to say I'll be leaving tomorrow. I've arranged everything with the housekeeper." Ethan froze. The words hit harder than any storm. "Leaving," he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. She nodded. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" "For both of us," she whispered. He took a step forward, his eyes burning into hers. "No, don't say that, Isabella. You think walking away will make it easier. It won't. Not for me, not for you." She swallowed hard, tears threatening. "You don't understand." "I understand too much," he interrupted, his tone deep, trembling with emotion. "I understand that I can't go back to the way things were before you. I understand that every room in this house feels alive only when you're in it. I understand that your voice, those whispers you thought I never heard, became the reason I started breathing again. Her tears fell silently now, one by one. You can't say these things, she murmured, her voice shaking. We come from different worlds. He moved closer until he stood just inches away from her. Then I'll burn mine down, he whispered fiercely. Every rule, every wall, every expectation. I'll destroy them all if it means I can keep you. Her breath hitched. The fire crackled behind him, painting his features in gold and shadow. He looked both powerful and broken. A man stripped of armor, standing bare before the only person who'd ever seen him. I never wanted to fall for you, she said softly. But every time I tried to pull away, you made me stay. Ethan's lips curved in a pained smile. Then stay tonight. Don't leave me in silence again. She shook her head weakly. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, he replied gently. Sometimes love is the only simple thing left. The words lingered in the air like perfume. She looked up at him, her eyes glimmering under the golden light. And in that fragile, breathless moment, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He reached out and held her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away the tear that slid down her cheek. You once said you wished I weren't your boss, he whispered, voice trembling. But you never asked what I wished. She swallowed hard. What do you wish, Ethan? He leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching, his voice barely a breath. I wish I'd met you before I became who I am, before money built walls around me, before loneliness became my only companion. Her tears fell freely now, and Ethan smiled softly through his own. But maybe it's not too late, he said. Ethan, he placed a finger gently against her lips. Shh. Don't run from this. Don't run from what's real. The room fell utterly silent. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire, the rhythm of two hearts daring to beat in unison. Then, for the first time, she took a step forward. She looked into his eyes, those deep, storm-colored eyes that had haunted her dreams, and whispered, I know you're awake, Ethan. He froze. She smiled faintly, a single tear gliding down her face. But I'll say it anyway. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear, and whispered the words that broke every chain around his heart. I love you. He closed his eyes, a soft laugh, half relief, half disbelief, escaping his lips. His hand slipped from her face to her waist, pulling her closer. He opened his eyes again, his voice a low whisper against her skin. Then don't ever stop saying it. And in that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The mansion that once symbolized wealth and solitude became something else, a witness to love, a sanctuary of hearts that had found their home in one another. The candles flickered, the fire dimmed, and for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwood, the man the world saw as invincible, exhaled not in exhaustion but in peace. He kissed her forehead tenderly, whispering, You healed me, Isabella. With nothing but your truth. She smiled through her tears, resting her head against his chest. And you saw me, she said softly, when I had nothing to give. They stood like that, wrapped in golden silence, hearts steady, breaths slow, two souls that had crossed every boundary to find the one thing neither had ever dared to believe in again, love. Outside, the moon glowed brighter, as if blessing their union in quiet approval. And in the mansion where whispers once lived in shadows, love finally spoke aloud. The mansion that once stood as a monument of power and loneliness had finally breathed. Not through its wealth or grandeur, but through love's quiet victory. Ethan Blackwood, the billionaire who once hid behind marble walls in silence, had found something no empire could give him, a reason to feel again. Isabella's whispers had begun as fragile secrets in the dark, but they became the light that shattered the coldness around his heart. She never tried to change him. She only reminded him that he still had a heart worth saving. In her truth he found redemption. In her eyes he found peace. Their love wasn't born in extravagance or perfection. It bloomed in honesty. In tears, in the moments between silence and confession. Ethan realized that the greatest wealth a man could ever own was not measured in gold or fame, but in the warmth of someone who saw him as human. And as the world outside continued to whisper his name with awe and envy, only one voice mattered to him now. The voice of the woman who once thought he was asleep, yet woke his soul instead. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives as a whisper, soft, honest, unforgettable, and changes everything.